Hey everyone, so this is a slightly different film than normal. This is a Rebel Wisdom investigation. And I've been in journalism for about 20 years, and this is one of the most fascinating, interesting stories that I've found in my whole time doing this work. And it's so important for right now. So it's about the recent interview with the conspiracy researcher David Icke on the London Real YouTube channel, and then it being taken down by YouTube. And it's got everything. It's got all of the questions about the tech platforms. It's got all of the questions about free speech. It's got all of the questions about why these issues are becoming so important right now in the wake of the pandemic. And I'm going to lay it out. I'm going to lay out the investigation that I've gone through. I'm going to lay out the evidence that I found. I'm going to put links to the evidence. I'm going to do it as carefully as I can. And I also want to say that I have approached London Real, Brian Rose, the interviewer, for a response to this. I've also asked David Icke for an interview. Haven't heard anything back yet, but if I do hear anything, I'm going to put it into the film. And why this is really important is it brings together so many of the issues that we've been talking about on the channel, why we can't trust anything, why we can't make sense of the world, and how we come to truth. These are hugely important issues, and this one case seems to epitomize like all of the problems and all of the difficulties in this area. So it's not just London Real, there's also going to be criticisms of the big tech platforms, including YouTube, in this as well. So I'm a little bit concerned about this being taken down, a few different reasons. One, I'm going to use some clips from London Real, and they have been calling in copyright and getting those taken down elsewhere on YouTube. I think I have a defense for that. This is fair dealing, it's newsworthy. So in the end, I think the process, YouTube take a long time to go through this process. I think in the end it would be reviewed and okayed. But in the meantime, it could easily be taken down for a while. So what I'm going to do is put a copy of this film on our website, the Rebel Wisdom website. And also there is a written piece as well that I'm putting on my Medium. So you can also potentially download this, keep it, and then put it up elsewhere as well. So starting at the beginning with the timeline, on the 6th of April, London Real did an interview with David Icke, who is a veteran conspiracy researcher. In it, Icke claimed that the COVID-19 was a hoax. He said that it was basically, I'm summarizing here, it's a very complex argument. You can find the interview elsewhere it's been taken down from YouTube, but it's available in quite a lot of places. And I think it's fair to summarize it as that COVID was a hoax. It was a cover for a murderous global cult determined to bring in a fascist state. We're using 5G to engineer a mass cull. And he also said that if humanity didn't get off its knees now, then human life as we know it is over. This was the second most popular live stream of the day, and YouTube took it down the next day after there was a big public outcry. It was big news on the BBC, it was big news on a lot of other media channels. And in the aftermath of it, Brian Rose, who's the interviewer and the host and the owner of London Real, said this is a clear breach of human rights, there's a clear free speech issue.
Putting the BBC out of business. The last time I checked, as humans in this world, we have this little thing. In America, we call it the First Amendment, called freedom of speech, as in you're allowed to say what you want to say. And this other thing in the same amendment called freedom of press, as in I can print what I want to print.
He announced that he would interview Icke again on the 3rd of May, which, as I'm recording this, is tomorrow, Sunday. He wanted it to be the biggest live stream in internet history, up to 1 million people. And also, shortly after that, he launched what he called the Digital Freedom Platform, which was designed, so he said, to pay for the live stream of the Icke interview, $100,000 at first, hit that within a day. The amount has been going up and up and up, and right now it's approaching $1 million for the Digital Freedom Platform, which we'll go into in a second. There are some things that I have sympathy with Brian Rose. I think the tech platforms are massively unaccountable. As he says, YouTube made a huge amount of money in partnership with him over quite a long time because YouTube streams ads and shares the ad revenue with the creator. So YouTube has made a lot of money out of London Real over a long time. Brian is very upset that they basically told the BBC that they were taking it down before they talked to him about it. I completely agree. There are real issues with the tech platforms that we're going to come to in a bit, huge problems around free speech and unaccountability. But what I want to concentrate on right now is how, on the other side, these concerns about free speech can also be weaponized. So as you can see from the crowdfunder, which is hosted on the London Real website, it's not on an independent crowdfunding platform, it's on the London Real website. It's framed as the digital freedom platform by the people, for the people. It was framed as a way of getting banned content out there without going through the big tech platforms. And Brian said very clearly, I'll play a clip now, where he said that it's independent of London Real.
Okay, what an incredible day here at London Real World Headquarters. Wow. The point is this is a separate entity that lives on past us, that is independently funded. So we don't draw any of this money. This is set up as an independent platform. So that has nothing to do with London Real. And the other thing is you don't have to contribute if you don't want to. You don't have to step up and fight on the front lines.
So if you click into the terms and conditions of this digital freedom platform, it says further down that it will be wholly owned by Longstem Limited. So you go to Companies House and check who Longstem Limited are. So Longstem Limited, from what I can tell on Companies House, again I'll put the screenshots here, is the entity that owns London Real and has one single shareholder, and that shareholder is Brian Rose. And then London Real launched the digital freedom platform with a couple of interviews with Dr. Buttar and a couple of other ones. So it's actually operational. If you have a look at it, it's within the London Real website. It's not a separate platform. It's housed within the London Real website next to the ads for London Real's high-value courses, which we'll come to in a second. And also, while I was making this, a few other people have started picking up on this story. There's a few videos coming out already. And I'm going to play a clip from one of them where they've gone into the source code and found that what is the stream for the digital freedom platform seems to be coming from a YouTube competitor called Dailymotion.
And here comes the main point of this whole video. I wanted to find out how much does that bandwidth really cost, so I went to the source code of his website to potentially find which hosting he uses for the stream. After a minute or two of scrolling, I finally found it. Wait for it, please. It's dailymotion.com. For those of you who don't know, Dailymotion is basically an alternative to YouTube. Same thing, basically a free video streaming platform. Now, at this point, I still thought he might be paying for streaming, so I went to their website to see if there's some custom streaming feature that they are offering and how much does it cost. As you can see, there are two plans available, and starter is free, but advanced says contact us. So I thought, okay, I'm going to contact them and ask, just for the sake of this video, since he's probably using that advanced plan, and even if he's not, he can always claim that's what he's using and that it costs. Before I did that, I clicked the offers tab and I was shocked. Starter plan says free, advanced offers says, oh look at that, free as well.
So I've messaged Dailymotion to ask them if this is the case, and we'll see what they say. So the Digital Freedom Platform is hosted within the London Real website. And what they've started doing recently is these interviews with the so-called banned figures. But if you check out, most of these people are not actually banned on Facebook or YouTube. Some are, some aren't, but most of them aren't. They're now starting to play like 10-minute clips on YouTube, and then you have to go to the website to watch the rest of it. What's important to point out is that, as Rose has said in the past, despite the fact they've got 1.7 million YouTube subscribers, it's very hard to monetize and make a business off YouTube. So what they generally do, the high value products, are the courses, where the Business Accelerator and the Learning to Podcast course, both of which cost about $3,500 for an 8-week course. Incidentally, I've also been sent this link to the website ScamGuard, where there are 20 negative reviews of London Real's courses. Again, I'll put the link in the show notes below so you can check this out yourself. I don't have no way of verifying it. Again, I've asked Brian for a response. So an interesting thing to understand now is what a brilliant business move this is. So basically, Brian Rose has managed to persuade a lot of people to pay for him to host his controversial content off YouTube. So therefore, reducing the risk of getting deplatformed, because he's not hosting the live stream with David Icke on YouTube anymore. So he's protecting himself while also getting people to pay to move his content onto the more important real estate, the more valuable real estate. So we've already talked about Longstem Limited, which is the company that owns London Real. The most recent filings show that Brian Rose is the sole shareholder. I've asked him again if that's still the case, and if I hear anything, I'll update that information. But you can also check at Companies House the latest accounts for companies. And if you check the latest accounts for Longstem Limited, it looks like they're in quite serious debt. And again, I'll put the link to the accounts in the show notes below, so you can check that out for yourself. So there seems to be a growing backlash. There are people who are posting videos on YouTube calling out what's going on, and also a lot of people posting comments criticizing or asking questions, and it seems that those comments are being deleted. Again, I've asked Brian Rose and London Real to confirm or deny whether they're deleting comments. Okay, so that concludes the journalistic investigation part. Again, like I say, I've put all of those claims to Brian Rose. We'll see what happens. We'll see what response we get. And now I want to kind of expand it out and talk about why I think this is such an important topic and why it just flags up so many of the massive issues that we're getting right now on both sides, the censorship of the tech platforms and then the backlash that it's creating. And these are huge issues, and I don't think anyone knows what the solution is to this. I've wrestled with this a huge amount. So I worked for 20 years in kind of traditional media. I was at the BBC, started on BBC News Online, then moved to Channel 4 News for many years, mostly as a foreign producer and shooter and editor as well. So I also then I left Channel 4 News formally in about 2012, started making documentaries mostly for the Emmy Award-winning Unreported World. Then in 2018, I started Rebel Wisdom, the YouTube media channel that you're watching this on. And so for 2 years, I mean, the reason for doing that was to tell stories that I wasn't able to tell and bring perspectives that I wasn't able to bring in the mainstream media. So I'm really passionate about the potential of alternative media for showing up the holes in the mainstream. The breakout film for Rebel Wisdom was called A Glitch in the Matrix, and that's now had 4 million views on YouTube. It was uploaded to Jordan Peterson's site. And the main thrust of that film was, what are the holes in the mainstream worldview? What is the kind of groupthink in the media? What are the problems with the traditional media? What are the values of the alternative media? And this kind of general realization that I was coming to, that this was a really important issue of all these perspectives that were being left out. And it's becoming increasingly important now. So the big picture framing, I would say, is that we're in this kind of interregnum period between two worlds. The old gatekeepers are losing their power increasingly fast. And for lots of good reasons, as I pointed out in previous films. Lots of journalism became self-satisfied, it became arrogant, it became corrupt, it became unaccountable, alignment of interests, all of that. I won't go into that right now. But we're in this and those gatekeepers are losing their power at an ever-increasing rate. But what we don't have is, you can imagine there might be some kind of decentralized, networked way of coming to truth, democratic way of coming to truth that could emerge on the other side. We're not there yet. So what we have is this ecosystem of misinformation, of bad actors, of no accountability. And all of these things are getting worse and worse and worse. And the actions of the tech companies, like really heavy-handed censorship and just saying, oh no, we need to follow the official narratives, is making a bad situation infinitely worse. So this is a really dangerous situation, and I think it's going to get worse. And now we're actually getting to the point where even in magazines like The Atlantic, we're getting questions like, does China have the right attitude to free speech? So I want to be able to carry on asking difficult questions and challenging narratives on Rebel Wisdom. We put out a piece recently talking about the unanswered questions in the Jeffrey Epstein case. There are huge questions about the origin of the virus that are genuine, that I want to be able to ask, and I will not be told what I can and cannot discuss by the big tech companies. So coming back to London Real, a little bit of background that might help people kind of understand if you're not familiar with them. I've been following them for quite a while. They interview a lot of really interesting people, some of whom I've also interviewed. People like Gabor Mate, people like Jordan Peterson. So London Real is entirely framed around Brian Rose. And he's a fascinating character, and the whole of London Real is this very interesting mix of kind of high-octane, take-no-prisoners business advice.
Our next accelerator course is starting soon.
But also it talks about New Age stuff. Rose himself has shown a lot of empathy in the past, talking about his struggles with alcoholism.
While I'm training in New York City, I just, these demons kind of come out, and you know, that all happened. You know, I remember I was on that bike. You can't see, there's a part in the sequence where I'm training on a bike and I go really to a state of physical exhaustion, and I was actually crying on that bike. It looks like I'm sweating, but I was crying, and my whole crew freaked out. They'd never seen me cry before, and I was literally kind of falling apart while I was there in New York. And I was in the East Village where I was first offered heroin, and I lived in this heroin addiction.
London Real's slogan is transform yourself, and Rebel Wisdom's slogan is inspire, ignite, transform. So there's a really, and we're actually passionate about a lot of the same things, like transformation of consciousness. I've met Brian Rose once. I went there when Jamie Wheel was interviewed on London Real a little while ago. And I've always been intrigued. I'm still intrigued. I think my sense is that there are at least two different forces, maybe more, operating within Brian Rose. My concern right now is that one of them has got the upper hand. And I think, to be honest, and I'm going to sketch out why I think this, I think what he is doing right now is incredibly dangerous. And I think it's really important that we use our free speech to call out people who we think are being irresponsible, because right now, if we don't do this, if we don't use our free speech and somehow create some kind of accountability, then what's going to happen is that the big tech platforms are going to take those decisions for us. That if we don't use free speech with responsibility, we're going to lose it. That's what I fear happening right now, because we all know there's a huge bias towards free speech absolutism on YouTube. I get it. I get where that comes from, but it's naive, because we all know that free speech does not include shouting fire in a crowded theatre. It's quite an outdated analogy nowadays, but the idea if you shout fire in a crowded theatre, you start a stampede, people get injured. So we all know there are responsibilities in free speech. We know that in our relationships. Free speech is nested within ethical framework, and so what we are finding is that we're at the mercy of the individual ethical decisions of each of the curators themselves, and some curators have more power than others. And so this is a moral dilemma that no one really knows the answer to, and a lot of people are grappling with right now. So I'm going to talk specifically about the David Icke interview and the moral challenges that brings up, because clearly shouting fire in a crowded theatre in the middle of a global pandemic, while people are at home, while people are vulnerable, telling them while there are attacks on 5G masts around the country. Just imagine the attacks potentially on 5G engineers who are putting these up as well. This definitely is covered by shouting fire in a crowded theatre. But also, if David Icke is right, let's steelman him, that this is actually a whole plot for global fascist, evil cult. This is information that needs to come out. So there is a defense to be made of featuring David Icke. But then you have to factor in how you frame him, how you deliver it, how you give people the tools to make those decisions, and how you, as a curator, as someone who is inviting him onto your platform, how you treat that interview. Those are hugely important issues. And we used to have a method for that, or we used to have ways of dealing with that, and we don't anymore. So after the interview, Brian Rose was framing this as, I don't agree with David Icke, but this is a freedom of speech issue. He has every right to have his voice heard, which I can agree with, but it's not really true. If you actually look at what Brian Rose asked David Icke in the interview, and I will bring up the questions now, he was framing David Icke as speaking the truth.
David, what's it like to watch 30 years of what you've been working on all come to fruition, prediction, reality in 3 weeks? What's it like?
So we've got to be really aware of people's motivations, of people's ethical motivations, of where their words are true. Again, I would much prefer to be having this conversation with Brian Rose. I've asked him now 4 or 5 times for an interview and he hasn't responded. And free speech without accountability, free speech without those ideas being challenged is not free speech, it's propaganda. The whole point of free speech is that those ideas then get challenged in the marketplace. And the problem with so much of the conspiracy narrative is that it's happening in this closed ecosystem. It's not being taken seriously by the mainstream, and I think the mainstream is going to have to start taking it seriously. It's not going to be able to keep gatekeeping all of this out. That's old thinking, which I'll come to in a second. I think engaging with David Icke is necessary. I've actually got a little bit of a soft spot for David Icke because he's been saying what he's been saying about this fascist cult for at least since the early 90s, and he hasn't changed his message, even when he was saying things like 12-foot lizards are ruling the world, Saturn's rings are a mind control device, the moon is a hollow spaceship, all of these things. He's never changed what he's saying, even when what he was saying was making him more unpopular and was making people think he was crazy. He's had the integrity to at least stick to the conspiracy theories that he believes rather than just changing it for what was popular. And I also think that he's not necessarily a fringe figure in any meaningful way. He fills out stadiums across the country. Up until now, the traditional media has been able to gatekeep him out. I don't think that's possible anymore. And I also don't think now that he's done this very popular video on London Real, up until that point, you could argue whether it was the right editorial decision to invite David Icke onto a platform in the middle of a global pandemic. We can argue about that. Right now, I think there is an editorial justification for interviewing David Icke in a responsible way and putting to him some of the things that he said in the past, saying, hang on, David, you said something similar before and it didn't seem to pan out. Do you also still believe this and still believe this? And also what you're saying about this being a hoax doesn't seem to add up. And what about 5G and the fact that actually the map of 5G doesn't really overlap with where the virus has been strongest? Iran didn't have 5G, Italy didn't have 5G. And you also keep saying that Wuhan was the first place in China to get 5G. That's kind of true, but it's not really true because actually Wuhan was one of 10 cities where they were doing trials of 5G. So all of these things all of these questions need to be raised. And how this is supposed to happen and used to happen in a functioning media ecosystem is that someone would do their research, they would go into an interview with someone, and you would interview someone and you would put those questions. They would then potentially go on to another show. That person would do their job as well. They would watch all the previous interviews with that person. They'd find out what questions they've been asked, what questions they haven't been asked, what questions they gave really good answers to, what they didn't give good answers to. And then you'd have this process of weeding out people with truth, and though the people who were bluffing or who were just not trustable would be weeded out. This is not happening right now. What we're having is these closed loop ecosystems and what London Real is doing now is making a big play to be a central node in the conspiracy ecosystem.
You know, I was broadcasting for 9 years, but now I'm starting to understand what it feels like to be in your shoes. Alex, maybe you can start off by giving me some advice here. What is actually happening to me? Because I'm not used to this space, and maybe you can tell me what's actually going on with me and what should I expect to happen in the following months and maybe year.
Well, Brian, your problem is you're authentic, you're real. I've never met you in person, watched you for years. You come across as real. I feel good looking at you. My gut, that's 1,000 times more powerful than my conscious mind. The gut's really your subconscious mind. Says this is a guy I can trust.
And then there's the issue of editorial judgment. When I was at BBC and Channel 4, we would spend, these questions are hugely nuanced. There are no absolutes, like why you interview someone, how you do it, protection of sources, who is impacted by you broadcasting a certain story. All of these ethical questions come up with every story, And what I learned, and kind of surprised me to learn, is that every single decision is contextual. Like there are no absolutes. But these are rules of engagement that have evolved over many, many years, probably centuries. I mean, the basic values of functioning journalism is that you strive for accuracy, you try and make sure that you get both sides of the story, or at least allow people to respond. These are like values that are pretty much non-existent as far as I can see in the alternative media. But coming back, so we now have the tech platforms trying to ad hoc make up editorial decisions on the fly, and I just don't see how they are going to be able to do this. Like, I want to be able to interview David Icke. I've asked David Icke for an interview. I think there's an editorial reason for doing it, and I want to be able to broadcast that interview with David Icke. I don't want them to be able to turn around and say, sorry, he's off limits. Who the fuck are you to make that decision for me? And how is YouTube going to be able to make a decision of whether this particular interview with David Icke was responsibly conducted and this interview with David Icke was not responsibly conducted? Are they able to make those decisions? It seems highly unlikely, but that's the place that they're in. So London Real have made a full-on pivot into conspiracy and alternative narrative. And some of these narratives are necessary. Like, we don't know, we cannot just stick with the mainstream narratives. And also some of these narratives that are being kind of seen as conspiracy are turning out to have more than a little bit of truth. The idea that the virus could have come from the lab has gone from being crazy to actually there's a lot of strong circumstantial evidence that lead us to suggest that there might be some truth in that. What was the gain of function research that was being done in Wuhan? All of these questions need to be examined. And also, what you have is this weird dynamic of any medical figure who is willing to say counter-narrative stuff is getting massively signal boosted. So you get people like Dr. Buttar, you get people like Dr. Kaufman saying, and they both featured on London Real, getting huge amounts of views. And this is a weird part of the incentive landscape. Dr. Kaufman, he's not a medical doctor, he's a psychiatrist, and yet he's making like very strong claims about medicine. Like we need to be asking the right questions of some of these figures. And at the moment, we've got this weird accountability problem where anyone saying anything counter-narrative is not being held to account. And I think this is potentially a fatal flaw in our information ecosystem. But we also know that some of these claims are really important and have turned out to be true. Take Dr. Cameron Kyle Siddell. He put out a film a couple of weeks ago saying that what he was seeing, he's a doctor from New York, he put out a film saying that what he was seeing was something more like altitude sickness in his patients rather than pneumonia. And he said that may be why over 50% of people who are being put onto ventilators are still dying, because it's not the right, we're not treating people the right way. And now, 2 weeks on, what he was saying is now being repeated by a lot of people, and even a recent piece in New York magazine basically quoted him and said that this is something that we can't cut down, we can't immediately discount these alternative voices. We need some kind of filtering system for them. We don't have it, and we don't know what one might even look like. So we've got this crazy dilemma where on one side we've got the tech platforms basically saying anything that is not mainstream and institutional is not accepted. And then on the other side, you've got this kind of free-for-all where free speech can be weaponized, claims of censorship can be weaponized to avoid any kind of accountability. And then you've got bad actors exploiting all of this at the same time. It's an absolute clusterfuck. And why I feel really, really passionately about this, especially about London Real, is because we've touched on a lot of these issues over quite a long time, particularly psychedelic narcissism, which I think is a big factor in this, and the information ecology. And I just want to repeat, if we don't find a solution, like everyone, if we don't find a solution to this problem, the solution will be imposed by the big tech platforms, and we are not going to like it. So I'm going to carry on following this story. I think it's one of the most fascinating ones I've ever covered, and I think it's such an important one for where we're at right now. So if you know anything about this story, if you're a whistleblower and you want to get in touch, then mail me at this email address here. I promise to keep your details confidential. I just want to end with one question to Brian Rose, and that's, how would you feel if I went to America and started broadcasting dangerous misinformation during the country's worst crisis while sitting in front of an American flag? So if you're going to carry on doing what you're doing, can you at least take the British flags down? So what happens next? We've just launched a hashtag called Rebel Wisdom Army, and we're launching a crowdfunding campaign. We're going for 1 million. We're not going to do that. But it does raise interesting issues around hypocrisy, around business models in this area. And of course, Rebel Wisdom, our business model is we sustain ourselves through our memberships. We sustain ourselves through an online course that we've just put together. But obviously, we're opening ourselves up to accusations of hypocrisy. I am open to criticism and look forward to seeing where this goes. Take care.